Our special guest today is Dr. Meg Lowman, known as Canopy Meg, the author of this wonderful memoir, The Arbornaut. And I read this last summer. I completely loved it, and I just encourage you, if you haven't read it yet, to pick it up and take a glimpse at some of the wonderful stories and a life of time of studying trees and being in science that Meg can offer. And today, you're going to share a little bit about some of the trees from our own backyard and then take us out so we can see them kind of with fresh eyes. So welcome.
Oh, cool. Yes. Before Meg jumps in, I just want to recognize that we are at Tree Campus USA, and that is thanks to Linda Melody Cunningham here, who started this, I think, about 15 years ago, and the Office of Sustainability, which I'm a part of, has kept our Tree Campus status going. So I just wanted to also mention that because we're trying to get more trees on our campus, so thank you for being here to help us identify and learn more about them. Thank you.
Yeah, good one. Okay, well, raise your hand if you aren't from Indiana. Is there anybody from somewhere else? Where?
Michigan. Ohio.
Massachusetts originally.
Okay. We had a Venezuela earlier, but we had mostly people who grew up with what we call temperate trees, meaning every October, what happens to the leaves?
They fall off, they turn color and fall off.
That's right. And did you know 3/4 of the trees in the world never do that? I never knew that. I grew up in upstate New York, and I couldn't believe that all the trees in the tropics, that includes Africa and Asia and South America and Australia, they don't have temperate trees, so they stay green all year round. And that was pretty surprising to me when I first went to the rainforest in age 22. I couldn't believe that they were green all the time. And so I started to study leaves. I thought, oh, it would be nice to know how long did those leaves stay on the tree. I don't know if anybody's read the book yet, but how long do you think a tropical leaf stays on the tree? Good question, eh? Well, I thought that was going to be the easiest PhD thesis, that I would get a hammock and I'd lie in the forest on my hammock and I would swing it and the leaves would fall on me and I'd measure them and then I would finish and get my PhD and it would be so easy. But my advisor said, nope, you're going to have to figure out how to get up the tree and figure out where the leaves are and what they're doing at the top of the tree. And I'm like, oh, holy cow, I wanted to train a monkey, but there were no monkeys in Australia. So that was out, and I thought maybe I could use binoculars, but I couldn't really do much with binoculars. So I ended up having to make a slingshot because they weren't available for sale. And then I sewed a harness with seatbelt webbing, and I ended up climbing up the tree, and up the tree I went. And you know what? For over 100 years, foresters had studied the top of the tree only when they cut it down. So when they cut the tree down, all the birds flew away, the insects were squished, the bird nests were squished. So they never knew that half of the species on the planet live in the top of a tree. It is this giant activity center for all kinds of species. So that led me to a whole lifetime of studying the tops of trees and doing a lot of climbing and other things like hot air balloons, different ways to get to the top of a tree. And so over the years, I've studied a whole lot of trees around the world in that process. And lo and behold, guess what? How long does a leaf live in a tropical tree?
A year.
11 years?
11, you say? 1,000. Oh, that'd be great. I wished it were 1,000. Guess what? You're the closest. 20. Some of them lived 20 years, which was so surprising. They gave me my PhD after 3. I'm happy to tell you, but I stayed in Australia and I kept looking as I had numbered the leaves with little waterproof pens, and so I could go back every year and see my leaves on different trees. And so the longest lived leaves were 20 years old compared to these guys, you know, only 6 to 8 months in our temperate trees. So it is pretty amazing to think about. So here's another question. Raise your hand if you've ever climbed a tree in your life. Ooh, pretty good. A lot of you. And you don't have to go far. You could Probably just sit on a low branch, but it is kind of a fun human activity. So we're all maybe linked to trees somehow. Our ancestors might have climbed trees. I was just in Borneo looking at orangutans. Talk about good climbers. They were amazing. And, anyway, I thought maybe it was my great-great-grandfather or something. But so today I want to talk a little bit about some of your neighbors, because you live on this campus, you walk around all the time. And now here's a real trick question. Raise your hand if you know the name of at least one person standing in this room right now beside yourself. Everybody, okay. Raise your hand if you know the names of at least half the trees out in the lawn. Ooh, but you walk by them every day. Are you always wondering, oh, who is that? What is it? No, you probably aren't. But maybe today we can learn at least 3 or 4. And we'll start with this one. Who knows what both of these are?
Maples.
Okay, anybody know the word maple? Now we have 2 kinds of maple though. Extra credit. Anyone know which kinds of maple I'm holding up?
One's Japanese? Is one a Japanese maple?
It's not, but that's not a bad guess because they do have sort of skinny little leaves like this one sort of does. What color is this?
Oh,
Purple?
Huh?
Reddish?
Red maple. This is red maple. And this one actually is sugar maple. And Kelly's going to walk around and this isn't always orange and yellow, but it usually is. But the cool thing about sugar maple is it's spelled with a U in the word sugar, right? S-U-G-A-R. And these leaves have a U shape between the lobe, whereas the red maple has a V shape between the lobes. So if you see U shape between the lobe, you know it's a sugar maple, because half the year these are all green and they otherwise look kind of alike. It's only right now that red maple confirms to us you really are red maple, and we love that. But for most of the year they're all green. So sugar maple with a U lobe and red maple with a V-shaped lobe. So if you want to walk that one around, that'll be really fun. And everyone else, you want to walk this one around? Thank you very much. You can let everybody see. Okay, so here's another one that's completely yellow. Anybody have any idea about this guy? Girl? Whatever? Yes. So this is a honey locust, and this is so beautiful right now. You can't miss it out on the campus. But the cool thing about locusts is, let me just get a better one, but this is one leaf. This whole thing isn't 40 leaves, it's one leaf. So each of these little surfaces is a leaflet, meaning like a mini leaf. But the way in tree language is wherever there's a bud, then it's a whole leaf. And the bud is here, and the bud is here. So that means this whole thing is one leaf. And it's called a compound leaf in the world of botany. So why would it make sense to have these little tiny leaves instead of bigger leaves? Why would you, if you were a tree, want to be made up of little tiny leaflets instead of bigger leaves?
To collect more sunlight.
You can collect more sunlight. That's a fabulous excuse and a good one. And you could also let the wind blow through you, right? You'd have less chance of tearing. So the leaflets are actually really good in windy places. So maybe the locust is a good tree to plant if you have a windy place. But they sure are beautiful right now. And thankfully, they didn't plant the locusts with thorns. So this one is quite harmless to touch, which is nice. You want to walk around with that? Go ahead. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to hand some of these out for you to have a close-up. Everybody, I want everyone to look at this in 1 minute, and don't shout it out, but then we'll talk about what is going on with this poor plant. I say poor plant, I gave something away, didn't I? You guys can share, and you guys can share more. Here's some for you. Everybody needs to look at what's going on with this one. Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll give it about 30 more seconds for your group to agree or disagree if there's any problems with this plant. Take some right here. Still got a big group. Okay, anybody know what this is? Because this is the commonest thing outside the door here. So I'm hoping at least if you're over 20, if you're a faculty or staff, you will probably know it with your eyes closed, right? Any guesses? It's kind of, why is it sort of hard to identify this one? What's wrong with it? It's got a lot of holes. It's been eaten. Something's eaten this. What do you think is eating this? Is it a bird?
Caterpillar, someone suggested over here.
Probably a caterpillar is a good guess. Some kind of insect has definitely eaten this. And only one kind, we can tell that because all the leaves have the same kind of damage. And this is an elm, by the way. It's a small-leafed elm, just kind of interesting. ELM, pretty easy. And once you see it outside, we'll go outside the last 10 minutes. We'll go outside in about 5 minutes. I'm from the rainforest in the tropics. I can't walk very long in your weather. It's too cold for me. So we're only going outside for a short walk.
Meg,
But
what elms are left? Because I know somebody asked about the Dutch elm disease. It took out so many elms. It was at the 50s.
yeah,
So
but
why-
still now, Dutch elm's still around.
Okay.
And there's
So-
American elm, there's slippery elm, that's in pretty good shape. There's
Okay.
small-leafed elm, that's in pretty good shape.
That's-
Chinese elm,
this
which
is a
they've
small
imported.
leafed, it's
Yeah,
called small leafed.
small-leafed elm, right. And so here is my trick question. Probably the people here that are under 15 can answer this best of all. I don't know how many of you that is. Anyway, what happens, how does a rabbit escape from being eaten by a fox? Maybe it gets eaten. How does a squirrel escape from getting eaten by a fox? Runs. It runs up a tree or it runs down a hole. So it has the ability to run away. So how does a tree escape from being eaten by an insect if it can't run away? Yes, poison. It develops chemicals in its leaves, which we actually use for medicine. So chemicals in plants are very, very important. A subject called ethnobotany is the study of how we use plants for medicines. In this case, the poor old elm didn't seem to do very well. Some insect has adapted to eat it really a lot. But if you look around at almost all the leaves on this table and all the leaves outside, anywhere, everywhere, I almost never see a leaf that hasn't been eaten a little bit by an insect. So insects try to eat them, and if they have a toxin, then they stop eating them, which is really, really great. Any other way that a tree could keep from getting killed by enemies? It could blow in the wind. If it was windy enough, it could blow the enemies away. That's a pretty cool idea. I never thought of that. Any other ideas that are equally cool? Yes.
Can it send out like a pollen or some like a pheromone that can deter bugs from eating it?
It can. In fact, a lot of trees communicate. They do send the message out to their family of trees saying, don't eat me. And that's another kind of chemical response, which is very, very cool. There's a few other interesting ones. If you're an elm and you're surrounded by maples and locusts and oak trees and there's no other elms in the whole forest, you could escape in space, we call that, where you escape because you're rare. You're the only one and maybe the caterpillars can't find you. And what happens with humans, a lot of times we plant something called a monoculture. Like we do that with corn, we do that with soy. We sometimes do that with trees, just planting 3 kinds of trees in the whole park. And then the insects find us. It's like finding your favorite salad bar with all your favorite stuff, and you eat. And but if you plant a forest that's diverse, then the animals have a harder chance to find you as their food source. And the one other thing trees can do, which is very strategic, is if you leaf out over a long period of time, the insects love the tender, juicy new leaves. So if you don't leaf all at once, maybe the caterpillars come out, they look for the young leaves, and if you don't leaf out until a month later, or you leaf a few leaves in April and a few in May and a few in June, you can escape from your enemies a little better, and they call that escape in time. So trees do have these different kind of signals, and sometimes you'll see that. You'll say, oh, the maples are leafing now, but the oaks aren't leafing till next month because they're all trying to escape the caterpillars that might otherwise eat them. So the tree is always having to fight this big war. You probably didn't know it when you walk out to the parking lot, but you're walking in a giant war zone where these trees are always trying to figure out how they can survive against all these enemies that move and try to eat them, and they try to avoid being eaten. So your homework next year is going to be two things. What ate this? And number two, are these elms still alive next year? How much damage did this cause? Will they be able to come back and have new leaves and do well next season and maybe avoid the enemy? Maybe they'll leaf out a little earlier or something like that and avoid the enemy that was eating them. Let's look at maybe one more and then we'll go outside. This one is kind of cool because it's so bright red, even though this is fading. Here's a better sample. Anybody know what this is? It's a bush. Yes, it's called burning bush to you. Here in Indiana, that seems to be a local name. In upstate New York, we used to call it winged euonymus. That's a little bit of a mouthful, but it has a stem with these little winged pieces of bark on it, which is kind of cool. And euonymus is actually the technical name, so I don't know how come my parents made me learn that long name, but they did. So I'm happy to learn about burning bush. Always bright red. Beautiful, beautiful bright red. As bright and beautiful as your pants are today. And your hat, and a few other things, your jacket. So these are really great to find and to see. There's some around the edge of the parking lot, which leads me to my last question. How come some trees turn red and some turn yellow and some turn brown? They do, exactly right. And they almost always are the same. And the secret there is the green pigment is the major one that we see all season. All of a sudden it gets cold. Sometimes it gets dry, which is disappointing, but definitely when it gets a frost, the little leaves stop operating. The machinery kind of freezes over and they stop bringing the water in and the nutrients out. And so the leaf starts to die back and get ready for winter. And when it does that, the green pigment is the most sensitive to cold. It dies first, and lo and behold, underneath the green is red in the case of burning bush, is yellow in the case of locust, different pigments that are part of the DNA of that tree. So we end up with these amazing colors. If it's a good frost, we get the colors brighter. If it's a drought and it's warm and it's not really a good frost, sometimes the colors are not so accentuated as they are other seasons in other years. But for the most part, red maple is almost always red. Sugar maple is almost always orange or yellow. Not always quite that way, but for the most part, you can tell the trees in the fall sometimes better than you can in the spring when they're all green and looking alike. So, any questions about leaves and insects? My favorite subject, because now we might go out just for about 5 freezing minutes to find these things outside. So I have to put on my hat and all that good stuff. But we'll just have a little short trip, and we're going to locate, last but least, one other species on our little field trip. This one. Anybody know this one? I won't tell you till we get there. What? It looks like pine, doesn't it? Okay, I'm going to save this one till we're outside. That one is another one that you're going to have to check on next year because it's in big trouble. But we'll see it when we go. So get your hats on. Here we go. Need to have a close-up look and see if you can figure out what it is. You're allowed to come up and touch it. If the toxins will not poison you.
So this one does have toxins? How do you know
That's a great question. He said, how do we know if it has toxins? This is the one that's really highly eaten. So this is our elm, and that makes me think it doesn't have as many toxins because it's allowed itself to get eaten. Maybe it tries to escape in time, like by leafing early or late to avoid the insect damage, but it didn't do a very successful job last year. So this is your very common small-leafed elm. It's everywhere. You'll start to see it when we walk down there, everywhere, and you can really identify it because it's got these brown leaves full of holes, the same kind of holes in every single case. So it's struggling to make a living on this campus, and that's where I'm interested in next year. How is it going to be? Is it going to be dead? Is it going to be sick? Or will the leaves come out perfect because maybe it'll leaf early and beat all the caterpillars? But you guys have to be the ones that figure that out because it's too late this year. We missed the insect and we missed all the activity of eating. Did anyone walk by this during the year and hear a lot of noise? Because you can hear insects eating, chomp, chomp, chomp. So keep an eye or an ear out for insects eating leaves, and maybe you'll discover something new. But this is your elm tree. Now we'll go down and see a few more. Okay, how about this one? You can probably tell from a distance, right?
It's a red
Maple, that's right. So remember the sugar maple with the U-shaped lobes? That's the one where we get the maple syrup, by the way. So you could keep that in mind. This campus could be a nice source of maple syrup coming up. The trees are growing bigger. I see a nice sugar maple over there with that orangey yellow color. Would be a good one to tap.
Did we decide that's the one?
I know we missed that. We skipped that one because the time was a little short.
No problem.
But
That's a red.
yeah,
Even though
there's
it's not red,
once in a
right?
while she can show you a red maple that looks orangey, and that's a bit tricky. But fortunately, this one's nice and bright red for us to. So anybody that wants to look at these V-shaped lobes as we walk by, that's a pretty young, but it's a beautiful tree. And it's right next door almost to our bright yellow locust down here. So remember I told you about the locust? This is one leaf. It would be a nice thing to do if you could count all those pieces for me, maybe later. But I'm guessing there might be like 40 or 50, don't you think? Because there's a lot of pieces, which we call leaflets. So there's the bud right here, and I just picked one leaf and I got all of this foliage. So these are really nice at this time of year to identify. You can see them pretty easily by their brilliant yellow color. And in a couple days, because these are so little, they're going to lose all those little leaflets, and sometimes they end up just with these little stems looking like this for a few days, and then they fall down too.
Oh, I have a question. Why do
Yes.
some honey locusts have seed pods and some don't?
Great question. So what, and some have thorns and some don't. And obviously at certain age, some trees reproduce, and when they're young, they usually don't reproduce. And so there is that level of activity going on in the tree. And some trees get pollinated by wind, some get pollinated by insects, some get pollinated by other things, and that activity has to go on too for them to have seed pods. And last but not least, some trees actually seed just before they die. There are different activities. I call that like the mother tree instinct, where they want to spread their seeds before they, can't lose the ability to be alive. So that's an interesting concept. So there's all kinds of things that trees do that really are pretty complex, like seeding and flowering, producing their toxins and getting eaten or not getting eaten, and losing their leaves and changing color. So all of a sudden the tree becomes this very complex organism, and you're going to have to keep a journal and start recording how many years. Some trees only seed every 5 or 10 years. And so that's also possible about what trees do, because then they call that mass seeding. You know why? To avoid insects coming to them that might eat their leaves as well as their seeds. So they're trying to fool the enemy. Okay, so we're going to go to this last tree that's in big trouble, and I need your help on it right up here. Okay, so does anybody know what this is?
Cypress, isn't it?
Yes, this is a bald cypress. This is, they always put it in the movies when the guy gets murdered in the swamp and they sneak out in the canoe. They're always canoeing through the knees of the bald cypress, and these trees love to grow in very moist swamps. So here it is on your campus. somebody told me it's because your soil is so clay-like that the water does collect like a swamp sometimes. I think it could have been a mistake. Maybe they got them on sale. I don't know. But anyway, they do exist around here, but rare. And so right now it looks like there was a dry period and these got brown. They're not necessarily changing color like this. Because see, usually the color change is from the top down, and so it's still kind of healthy at the top, but not at the base. So the question here is, are these trees dying? Did they just have a little drought this year? Are they really cold because they actually come from Georgia up north? Or what's going to happen to them next year? So you're all going to have to come back to campus next year and walk past these trees and tell Kelly about their health so she can write me a note. But bald cypress, it's a good one to know because it's definitely a different looking foliage, isn't it, from anything else around. So it's kind of easy to identify them. But it has some issues with where it's living and how it's managing to survive. And you are all now the tree doctors. So with that, where is my
Right.
host? I think you have to tell them about the talk, or I don't know what else.
Yes. Meg will be talking again at 4 o'clock, more specifically about her canopy work at the tops of trees and just the real importance of conservation of trees. I'm representing the Office of Sustainability, which co-sponsored this, but also a big shout out to Kelly and the Day of Writing, National Day of Writing, that is bringing this in. It's amazing that we have a scientist who is also an amazing writer. So inspiration to all scientists and writers out there. You can be both. So thank you for coming. And are there any last minute questions that people have about the trees on our campus? I think it is a real call for us to just appreciate what we walk past every day and also look out for their preservation, even the single tree, but as well as the trees they represent across the globe. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
See you later.
Thank you.